Sorry, I'm like just focused on the ear. I know I shouldn't start this interview that way, but I'm looking, but your ear looks fine.
Your ear? We're talking about when Tyson bit it, right?
It's this ear, right?
Yeah.
Let me see it. Is it? Oh, there's a little piece missing right there.
Just a tip.
Does it hurt?
Nope.
Did it grow back a little bit?
No. It's the same.
What was he thinking? What was that all about? Why did he do that?
You know, anger. You know, disappointment.
What did you want to do when he did that to you?
Los Angeles, the boxing world is buzzing. The U.S. Olympic team is stacked future legends sharpening their names under the bright lights of the Summer Games. And right there, in the light heavyweight bracket, is a 21-year-old kid from Atlanta, Georgia, carrying the kind of quiet confidence that comes from surviving more than just the fight game. Evander Holyfield wasn't a trash talker. He didn't strut, didn't posture, but inside the ring he moved with that cold precision, the kind that makes opponents question every step forward. In those early rounds of the tournament, he wasn't just winning, he was dismantling people, sharp combinations, tactical footwork, that patient rhythm that forces a man into making mistakes. The gold medal, it wasn't just possible, it was starting to feel inevitable. And then, the semifinal against Kevin Barry of New Zealand, round 2, the stakes, a shot at Olympic glory, the kind of moment a fighter dreams about from the time they're shadow boxing in a cracked gym mirror. Holyfield was locked in, reading Barry like a book, and then in one clean motion it happened. Holyfield uncorked a left hook, beautiful textbook fight ending. Barry hit the canvas, the crowd roared. America had another gold medalist, or so they thought. The referee stepped in. Instead of a count, instead of raising Holyfield's hand, he waved it off. The explanation, the punch came after the command to break. Just like that, disqualified. In the space of a heartbeat, the cheers turned into a stunned murmur. The crowd thought they'd just seen a champion crowned. Holyfield had just seen his dream stolen. Later, Barry himself admitted, yeah, the call was wrong. But Olympic boxing isn't about rewinds, it's about the final ruling, and in that moment, history turned from triumph to heartbreak. Now, here's the thing, moments like that, they crush some fighters, they vanish from the sport, haunted by what could have been. But for Holyfield, that wasn't the end, it was ignition. Because this is the part of the story you don't see in the medal count. Holyfield didn't pack his bags and disappear into a what-if haze. He took that bronze medal, shoved it in a drawer, and made a vow. If the amateurs wouldn't give him gold, the pros would give him everything else. And that's exactly where this story shifts. Because the Evander Holyfield that stepped out of the Olympic Village wasn't the same man that walked in. He had a chip the size of the heavyweight crown sitting on his shoulder. And he was about to spend the next 3 decades cashing in on it. See, when Holyfield turned pro in 1984, he wasn't starting with fanfare. He wasn't the media darling. He wasn't even considered the most dangerous in his division. But fight by fight, he carved his name into the sport, and not just with wins. He did it with the way he fought. Smart, patient, but ruthless when the opening came. The 1980s cruiserweight division didn't get headlines like the heavyweights, but Holyfield made it impossible to ignore. Dwight Muhammad Cowie, Carlos de Leon, every big name, every belt, he took them all. Unifying the division wasn't just an accomplishment. It was the first warning shot to the rest of boxing. This man wasn't stopping here. The jump to heavyweight was where the doubters got loud. They said he was too small, said the power wouldn't translate, that he'd get eaten alive by the monsters of the division. But Holyfield wasn't built to take advice from doubters. His first heavyweight fights weren't tune-ups. They were statements. Pinklon, Thomas, Michael Dokes. Wars that showed the world he could not only survive with the big men, he could beat them. And then came the night in 1990 when fate threw him a curveball. Everyone had been waiting for Tyson vs. Holyfield, the unstoppable force against the disciplined warrior. But Buster Douglas shocked the world, knocking out Tyson and taking his belts. That should have been the end of the dream fight. But for Holyfield, it was opportunity. Later that year, he stepped in with Douglas and dismantled him in 3 rounds to become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. That's the thing about Holyfield. He was never about waiting for the perfect moment. He fought whoever was there, Foreman, Holmes, Riddick Bowe in one of the greatest trilogies in heavyweight history, and no matter the outcome, win or lose, he kept coming back. But if you ask the casual fan what they remember most, it's the Tyson saga. 1996. Holyfield, now in his mid-30s, was seen as past his prime. The oddsmakers had him a 25-1 underdog. They said Tyson would crush him inside a few rounds. But when the bell rang, it was Tyson who got walked down, tied up, and battered. Round 6, Tyson hit the canvas. Round 11, fight over. The too small ex-cruiserweight had just dethroned the baddest man on the planet. The rematch, that's where boxing history turned surreal. The infamous bite. Twice, Tyson, frustrated and unraveling, took a chunk out of Holyfield's ear. The fight ended in chaos, and the headlines went global. But here's the real story. Holyfield didn't retaliate, didn't swing in anger. He stayed composed. In that moment, he showed what made him different. Because when you zoom out, you see the full arc. A man robbed of gold on the world's biggest amateur stage. A man told he was too small for the big leagues. A man written off again and again, only to come back every time. Holyfield's career wasn't about one fight. It was about the sum of all of them, and that bronze medal, that so-called disappointment, that was the start of it all. Without it, maybe there's no heavyweight reign, no Bowe trilogy, no Tyson upsets, no Hall of Fame legacy. Sometimes, the most important win is the one the judges don't give you, because that's the one that teaches you how to take everything else. So the question now, when we talk about Evander Holyfield, are we talking about the man who was robbed, or the man who built a career out of never needing anyone to hand him a win? In the late 1980s, the heavyweight division was a fortress. It belonged to monsters, men whose punches didn't just end fights, they ended careers. At the top of that food chain sat Mike Tyson, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a fighter so ferocious that stepping into the ring with him felt less like sport and more like survival. And in a world like that, there wasn't much room for a 190-pound small guy. From the cruiserweight ranks, Evander Holyfield heard it all: too light, too clean, cut, too technical, not enough size, not enough power, and definitely not enough to walk into the land of the giants and live to tell about it. But here's the thing, Holyfield never asked for permission to be great. Before the heavyweight skeptics even knew it, he had already put the cruiserweight division in a chokehold. One by one, the champions felled: White Muhammad Cowie, Ricky Parkey, Carlos de Leon. By the time the dust cleared, Holyfield had every belt the division had to offer. And then, instead of staying where he was comfortable, instead of coasting on that dominance, he looked up, way up, at the mountain called heavyweight. The experts laughed, fans doubted, promoters whispered, but Holyfield wasn't here for their approval. He was here to test himself against the biggest, baddest men alive. His arrival at heavyweight wasn't a cautious dip in the water. It was a cannonball into the deep end. His first steps in the division were anything but tentative. James Quick, Tilly's, a veteran who'd gone the distance with Tyson, found himself overwhelmed. Pinklon Thomas, a former champion with a stiff jab, got chewed up and sent home early. And then came Michael Dokes, a former title holder with fast hands and bad intentions. What followed was a 10-round firefight, a war that had no lulls, no slow moments. Holyfield outlasted him, outpunched him, and left the boxing world in shock. This wasn't just a cruiserweight trying to keep up. This was a man making the heavyweights look human. The plan, of course, was always Tyson, the unstoppable force against the disciplined machine, and for a moment, it looked like destiny. Both men were winning. Both men were clearing the field. But then came February 11, 1990. Buster Douglas in Tokyo, the night the boxing world stopped spinning. Douglas didn't just beat Tyson, he battered him, taking the belts and rewriting the sport's biggest upset. The dream fight evaporated overnight. For most fighters, that would have been a setback. For Holyfield, it was a green light. Later that same year, he stepped in with Douglas, and in just 3 rounds dismantled him, becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The critics weren't impressed. Douglas, they said, was out of shape. They said Holyfield hadn't beaten the real king. They called it luck. Holyfield didn't argue. He just fought everyone who stepped forward. George Foreman, at 42 years old, but still throwing punches like cinder blocks. Larry Holmes, the master jab artist. Bert Cooper, a rugged brawler who had Holyfield on the brink before being stopped. Each fight was different, each challenge unique, and Holyfield answered them all. And then came Riddick Bowe in 1992, a younger, bigger, stronger challenger. Their first fight was a war, 12 rounds of brutality, skill, and heart. Holyfield lost the belts that night, but what he gained was respect, real respect. They ran it back in '93, and Holyfield regained his titles in a fight forever marked by the fan man, parachuting into the ring mid-bout. The Bowe trilogy became one of the great rivalries in boxing history, epic in scale, brutal in execution. Holyfield won 1, lost 2, but each fight left both men etched deeper into the sport's mythology. By the mid-90s, most thought Holyfield's time was done. The heavyweight division was young again, hungry again, and he'd been through too many wars. But that's where the story twists. In 1996, against the odds, Holyfield finally got Tyson. Not the 1988 wrecking machine, but still a feared, ferocious champion. The betting odds had Holyfield as a massive underdog. The experts predicted an early knockout loss. But on fight night, it was Tyson who got bullied, tied up, and beaten down. In the 6th round, Tyson hit the canvas. By the 11th, the fight was over. Holyfield was champion again, this time against the man everyone said he'd never beat. The rematch in '97 turned into one of the most infamous nights in sports history. The night Tyson bit his ear twice. The fight ended in chaos, and while the headlines focused on the bite, the truth was clear. Tyson had no answer for Holyfield's style, his strength, or his composure. Through all of it, Bowe, Tyson, Foreman, Holmes, Holyfield carried the same mentality he had back in 1984 when Olympic gold was snatched from him. A refusal to quit, a hunger that didn't fade when the cameras turned off. By the time his career wound down, Holyfield had faced every style, every size, every era's version of the guy. He didn't always win, but he always showed up, always fought, and always left the ring with the respect of those who understood just how hard it is to do what he did. Because here's the truth, Evander Holyfield didn't just move up to heavyweight. He rewrote what was possible for a cruiserweight. He proved that skill, heart, and relentless preparation could close the gap against size and power. And in doing so, he carved his name alongside the biggest legends the sport has ever known. So maybe the question isn't whether Holyfield was the greatest cruiserweight of all time, or one of the greatest heavyweights. Maybe the real question is, how many divisions in the history of boxing can say one man mastered them both? In boxing, there are fights that define careers, and then there are fights that define eras. In 1996, the heavyweight division was standing in the shadow of one man, a fighter who didn't just win, he devoured his opponents. Mike Tyson was back, fresh out of prison, destroying everything in front of him with the same frightening precision that made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history. The aura of invincibility had returned. His comeback was a blitzkrieg. Peter McNeely, Buster Mathies Jr., Frank Bruno, Bruce Seldon. None lasted more than a few rounds. The talk in the gyms, in the bars, in every corner of the fight world was the same. Tyson was inevitable. And then there was Evander Holyfield. Older now, with years of ring wars etched into his body. He'd been through Riddick Bowe's trilogy, the George Foreman and Larry Holmes showdowns, and countless battles that had taken their toll. Doctors had even suggested he retire after a heart scare in '94. The critics called him faded. The bookies made him a 25-1 underdog. The matchup with Tyson, they called it a mismatch, a payday, maybe even a farewell. But if there's one thing the fight world should have known by then, it's that Holyfield never read from the same script as everyone else. When the first bell rang on November 9, 1996, the crowd expected Tyson to charge, to bulldoze, to end it early. Instead, Tyson found himself in a clinch, unable to muscle free. Every time he lunged forward, Holyfield's head and shoulders were there to meet him. Every time he tried to explode with combinations, Holyfield was either smothering the attack or firing back with sharp counters. This wasn't just survival, it was control. Tyson had always thrived on intimidation. He'd won half his fights before the first punch landed, breaking opponents with his stare alone. But Holyfield's eyes didn't blink. In the sixth round, the unthinkable happened. Holyfield landed a crushing counter, sending Tyson down. The crowd roared, the tide had turned, and by the 11th round, it was over. Holyfield had stopped the most feared man in boxing, taking his WBA heavyweight title and shattering the myth of Tyson's invincibility. The boxing world erupted. The so-called mismatch had turned into a masterpiece of strategy and grit. Holyfield had weathered Tyson's early storm, broken his rhythm, and imposed his will in a way no one thought possible. But the story wasn't over. Almost immediately, the rematch was set. This wasn't just about revenge for Tyson. It was about reclaiming his aura, proving the loss was a fluke. June 28, 1997, the world watched again. The opening rounds were tight. Tyson came forward with urgency. Holyfield responded with that same inside strength and relentless clinching that had frustrated him in the first fight. And then came round 3. It started in a clinch, nothing unusual, but then Tyson leaned in and the crowd saw Holyfield jerk back in shock. Blood appeared on his ear. The referee stopped the action, warning Tyson for biting. Moments later, it happened again. The disbelief in the arena was instant. 2 bites, 1 ear partially torn. The heavyweight championship of the world had just descended into chaos. The referee had no choice. Tyson was disqualified. Holyfield retained his belt, Tyson's license was suspended, and the incident became one of the most infamous moments in sports history. Long before social media, before the term viral meant anything, the images of Tyson biting Holyfield's ear were everywhere. On every news broadcast, every sports page, every late-night comedy monologue. In the weeks that followed, opinions split. Some saw Tyson's actions as the ultimate sign of frustration, that Holyfield had so thoroughly dominated him psychologically that the only escape was to break the rules. Others saw it as a tragic fall from grace for a fighter who had once been the most feared man alive. For Holyfield, though, the legacy was cemented. He had beaten Tyson twice, once by knockout and once by forcing him into a meltdown that would haunt him forever. In a sport built on proving toughness, Holyfield had shown an unshakable mental edge. The bite fight may have been an infamous night for boxing, but for Holyfield, it was the exclamation point on a career that had already been defined by defying the odds. From cruiserweight champion to heavyweight king, from the Olympic heartbreak to the Bow Wars, from the supposed mismatch to the Tyson victories, he had written one of the most improbable stories in the history of the sport. Even years later, when fans debate the greatest heavyweights, the conversation always circles back to that November night in '96. Because it wasn't just that Holyfield won, it was how he won. By standing in front of the most intimidating puncher of his generation and refusing to take a backward step. By proving that discipline, strategy, and mental fortitude could dismantle raw power. The ear bite will always be remembered. But for those who understand boxing, it's the first fight. The methodical, relentless breaking down of Tyson that truly defines Holyfield's immortality. And maybe that's the real question. In a sport where power often overshadows everything else, did Holyfield prove that heart is the most dangerous weapon of all?